You're listening to the Good Morning Show on WBOK 1230 AM.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome back to the Good Morning Show with Charmel and OT. You know, as a part of our Meet the Candidate series, we have a chance to talk with candidates who are seeking your vote for higher office. It's our opportunity to hear from them, hear a little bit more about their platform. And so I'm really excited to be joined by Ms. Michelle-Scott-Bennett. She's running for Civil District Court Domestic Section 2. It's a part of our Meet the Candidate series. So welcome to the Good Morning Show.
Thank you. Good morning to you as well.
Good morning. So why are you running for Civil District Court Domestic Section 2? And what's the difference between the regular Civil District Court and the domestic section?
Okay, well, domestic sections cover your family law cases. So that would be your divorces, your child support, child custody, spousal support, domestic abuse cases, and community property. And the reason that I'm running is because for the last 17 years, I have practiced in the area of family law in my own law firm. And I've seen some of the problems that the litigants encounter with the court system. When the legislation came down to designate family court judges in 2011, I thought that was the hugest blessing for the community because we have, as a practitioner, I have seen the revolving door of your junior judges or your newest elected judges who handle the family court docket for a couple of years and then will rotate up to the civil docket. And what that does is it creates a problem for not only the practitioners but also for the litigants because you have judges who are basically not as experienced in the area of family law, and so about the time that they establish, how they're going to run their courts, they're moving on and new judges are coming in. And so that's one of the reasons that I decided to run is because I've seen the problems, I've complained about the problems, and when the legislation came down, I thought that I should step up and be part of the solution.
Do you think that some of the things that you saw as issues prior to there being this specific section being put forward still exist?
Well, I think that this is definitely a step in the right direction, electing judges that want to do the designated family court bench. We have the first elected judge right now in Domestic Section 1, Judge D'Souza, who is also running for re-election at this point in time. This is the second seat that's coming available, so I believe electing myself as someone who really wants to practice in the area of family law will start towards, remedying that problem.
So when a voter is listening and learning more about this section of court, what kinds of things should they take into consideration when evaluating a candidate for judge for domestic section?
Well, I definitely believe that the voters need to be informed about what domestic section 1 and 2 are. A lot of times, just because it says domestic, they don't equivalent that with family court, and a lot of times we get confused with juvenile court. This is not juvenile court. This is your family court. Like I said, we deal with divorces, custody, child support, spousal support, and domestic abuse and community property cases. But some of the things that your voters should look at is one, experience. As I stated, I have practiced in the area of family law for the last 17 years, and my experience is definitely proven in that area because that's all that I do. The other thing that they should look at is the number of years that not only the number of years that a person has practiced, but the type of practice that they've done. A lot of times we have practice experience, but it may not be in that area. I have also sat as the domestic commissioner, so I actually have judicial experience handling the domestic court docket. And that's one of the things that your voters should look at is not only your professional experience, but also your practical experience for the candidate. As far as practical experience, I've been married for the last 20 years, so I am a wife, and we have 2 teenage children. And that's something that you definitely want to consider when you're looking at a family court judge, because people don't want someone making decisions about their children if they don't have children.
That's a really interesting point. And I want to go back to what you said about being a domestic commissioner. Can you tell us about what that position is, what are some of the duties, and why you think that provides you with the experience to be a domestic section civil district court judge?
Okay. Well, the domestic commissioner, this position was in Jefferson Parish, and they have a little bit different structure. But as the domestic commissioner, I actually wore the black robe. I presided over the same type of cases that I will be presiding over in family court in Orleans Parish. And as you know, the laws don't change from parish to parish. And so I believe that that experience not only allows me to walk into the door and roll up my sleeves and get to work, but it's the same type of cases that I will be handling as the family court judge in Orleans Parish. Most of what I tried in domestic court was divorces, child custody, and domestic abuse cases. But as the commissioner, you do the same job as the judge. The only difference really is that it was Jefferson Parish and that it was an appointed position as opposed to an elected position.
You know, it's some really interesting experiences, practical experience. But I wonder about one of the things that you said. The laws don't change parish to parish. And this isn't a change of the law, but there's sometimes the feeling that when male litigants, so males who appear in family court, they're treated differently than women who appear in family court. Do you think that that perception is actually true? And what would you do if elected to reduce some of that perception?
Okay, I definitely think that there is the perception. That is a true perception. I believe that a lot of times the males, as far as your child support and your custody, sometimes they do get the short end of the stick, especially when you're talking about custody cases, because what predominantly happens in a custody case is when mom and dad split up or boyfriend and girlfriend split up, the children go with mom. And the best interest of the child looks at who the children have been with since the separation. And so, yes, the males usually come in on an uneven playing field if they have not retained custody of the children since the separation. And so even though it is a perception, it does play a role in that. In child support cases, definitely males predominantly pay child support more than females. If there's a situation where dad does have custody, he obtains the same rights as the female would have to get child support. But the problem with that is a lot of times you're addressing custody and child support at the same time. And so once custody has been addressed, then dad's not going to get child support if he doesn't obtain custody of the children. And so that perception is real, definitely. What can be done to, I guess, help with that perception is to make men aware of how the system works. You know, a lot of times when a relationship is breaking up, be it boyfriend and girlfriend or mom and dad, the dads will step out of the picture in an effort to make things go smoother. They don't fight for the children initially. And that's a downfall to them, because the court looks at whether or not this is the initial filing and how long the separation period has been. So if you are looking to get custody of your children as a dad, then when you separate, you don't have to fight and tussle children away from mom, but you need to file immediately, because the courts do look at how long it's been since the separation period and where the children have resided.
Do you think you'll be able to provide some of that education to the community if you were elected onto the bench?
Certainly. I think that education can be provided regardless of who we are. There are some provisions as far as the judge is concerned in not being able to practice law for the clients and give legal advice, but that does not prevent us from providing that information out there. One of the things that I would love to see done and plan to do when I'm elected is to establish a website so that you have your general information for the litigants that come in. And that website will also include practitioner information, what the judges want to see in my courtroom specifically, how I handle my courtroom, how I address evaluations, how I address child custody, testimony, and those types of things that I know practitioners are interested in knowing about from the judges. And not everybody practices, a lot of family law. And so when you get a case and you want to know, okay, what's this judge's position on evaluations? Do I have to have the custody evaluator there? If I don't want to, take testimony or bring the report in, will they allow the child to testify? Those types of basic information needs to be out there so that not only can the practitioners know about it, but also the litigants.
That's a really important point, and I think you're telling our listeners a little bit more about your plan if you were elected. What would be one of the things, as you've moved throughout the community, you've met a lot of people and told them about why they should elect you, what's one of those common misperceptions that folks have about domestic section and about just family court?
I think the biggest common misperception is that it's juvenile court. When you say domestic or you say family court, I think people automatically get that confused with juvenile court, because we will get questions such as, well, what about adoptions? Or what about when the state takes the children, and those types of things. And so a lot of times from the questions that people are asking you, you can kind of gather that maybe they don't understand what the court actually does. And so I think that is one of the largest misconceptions that I've encountered so far.
So what does the court actually do?
Again, the court does divorces. Family court, which is domestic sections 1 and 2, we do divorces. We do child custody, child support cases, community property cases, your spousal support, and your domestic abuse cases.
You know, it's really important for us to know the jurisdiction and understand what things or types of cases we would be voting for when we're dealing with this election. Right now, we're speaking with Ms. MichelleScott-Bennett. She's a candidate for Civil District Court Domestic Section 2. It's a part of our Meet the Candidate series. We're learning more from candidates who are seeking higher office here in Orleans Parish. So tell us a little bit more about what's working well in Domestic Section Court and what's not working well. And if you have any additional ideas, you know, we've talked a little bit about the website, the community education, any other ideas about what needs to happen as a systemic reform to make sure people have access to justice.
Okay. Well, what is working well, like I said, we have our first designated domestic court judge, and I believe that was definitely a step in the right direction. Electing the second one will further that cause. There is supposed to be a third position because, as you know, 3 judges will handle the family court docket, and right now that third one will still be a rotating judge. I don't think that's going to work so well. But those things so far, the designation of family court judges is working well. Another thing that I believe is working well is to obtain hearings in the court. Is one of the things that people often complain about, is that they're often filing things and things are getting continued. When you have your designated family court judges, you and someone who is interested in practicing family law, because one of the things that I ran into consistently as a practitioner is that you had judges that weren't really interested in doing your domestic cases. And so you would come into court, and here you have these 2 parties fighting over their child or obtaining a divorce or, you know, some other domestic issue, and you get the judge saying, okay, well, what are we here for? You know, or you're back again, or things like that are not helpful to parties who are fighting over things that are very important to them, you know. And so I think that one of the things that we can do by electing designated family court judges is you're going to have people sitting that are interested in the position.
So talk to us a little bit about the rise in pro se litigants. So for folks who may not know, a pro se person is someone who appears in court without an attorney. And as we have seen more and more folks who are dealing with family issues, it would seem that the rise in pro se litigants, particularly in that section, would really impact the docket or how many cases are moved through the court. What's going on there, and what would you do about it if you were elected to the bench?
Okay, well, what is going on when you say the rise? There has always been a predominant number of pro se litigants coming through the courts. I think that this is the most attention that they're getting now that they're designating family court judges, but that's always been a problem. And one of the things that I did as the domestic commissioner was, because I was aware that a lot of our clients would come through the courts and be unrepresented, I established a list of questions that were designated for the type of case that they were coming through. One of the big things that we tried was either custody or protective orders. And so I had a standard list of questions so that when your unrepresented parties come in, I could gather as the judge the information that I needed from the litigants and kind of streamline the process, because as you know, a lot of times when people come into court and they're not represented, they don't know the process, they don't know the system. And if you start out as the judge with an open-ended question, okay, Ms. Jackson, just tell me what happened on such and such day, you're liable to get a lot of information that is not relevant to what you need to determine to make sure that either custody is granted, you know, fairly to whoever would get it, or that a domestic abuse petition is issued. And so I had a designated list of questions that started out the case as far as answering those questions, I would then finish up with, making sure that the litigant if they had any other information that was not covered in those questions, they were then free to give that information. But that really streamlined the case. It took away some of the time that it takes to get the litigants guided and on the right track. And I believe that it really gave the court the information that it needed to make a informed decision and to solicit that testimony, from the clients.
So in our last few moments, what are some things that you want to make sure voters in Orleans Parish know about you and take into consideration when they're evaluating you for Civil District Court Domestic Section 2?
Well, first of all, my name is Michelle-Scott-Bennett, and I'm number 67 on the ballot. I would like all of the voters to know that I have practiced in the area of family law for the last 17 years, that I have actual judicial experience as a judge sitting and handling the domestic docket, so I am able to walk in the door and do this job without, any problems, and that I also have the practical experience of being a wife and a mother. I've been married for the last 20 years. We're raising teenage children, so I understand the struggles that parents go through. As a law office owner, I also have experience with handling employees, hiring, and knowing what I'm looking for in terms of an employee and someone who can do the job. And so those are the things that I really think that voters need to know.
Say your candidate number one more time for our listeners.
Again, my name is Michelle-Scott-Bennett, and I am number 67 on the ballot.
So we've been speaking with Ms. Michelle-Scott-Bennett. She's a candidate for Civil District Court Domestic Section 2. It's a part of our Meet the Candidate series, our opportunity to let WBOK listeners learn a little bit more about what's happening in this election series. We want to make sure the conversation continues, and we thank you for joining us and really just talking to the Good Morning Show listeners about what you do and what you want to do for the voters.
Thank you so much.
The Good Morning Show is really excited to continue the conversation. Tomorrow we're going to be joined by Miss Mary Claire Landry. She's going to talk to us a little bit more about domestic violence. We're going to learn more, and it ties in really nicely with some of the questions that we're also being asked in this Meet the Candidate series. It's not just our opportunity to talk about what we hear with the domestic section, but also to take these learnings throughout the month and throughout the year. So we want to make sure that folks are tuned into that conversation and that they also join us for Small Business Thursday. It's our opportunity to learn more about what businesses in our communities are doing to support each other, and they're creating economic opportunity. It's also our chance to learn about nonprofits and what they're doing to support the people in our community. We just want to thank you for tuning into the Good Morning Show. You've been listening to WBOK, Real Talk for Real Times.